You reach for the fries and salt them before you've even taken a bite. You don't think about it. You just do it. Your tongue is already waiting for that sharp little jolt, that hit of satisfaction that makes bland food suddenly feel finished. It seems like the most ordinary habit in the world, but the real answer to why you crave that taste is far stranger than habit. It reaches back hundreds of thousands of years, into bodies built for a world where salt was almost impossible to find. Here is the strange part. For most of human history, salt was not on the table. There was no shaker. There was no mine, no trade route, no bag of it sitting in a kitchen cabinet. Your ancient ancestors lived and hunted and raised children on diets that, by modern standards, were almost salt-free. So how did they survive without it? And when did eating salt on purpose even begin? To understand that, you have to understand what salt actually is to your body. It is not a flavor. It is a mineral your cells cannot function without. Sodium controls the fluid balance in your blood. It fires the electrical signals in your nerves. It keeps your muscles, including your heart, contracting on schedule. Too little, and your body starts to shut down in slow motion. Confusion, cramping, eventually, collapse. Your body knows this. That is why it built you a craving instead of leaving it to chance. Before agriculture, before villages, before anyone thought to boil seawater into crystals, early humans got almost all their sodium from meat and blood. A hunted animal is salty in a way plants are not. So a hunting group that ate mostly animal protein was, without knowing it, meeting its needs without ever tasting a grain of processed salt. Picture one of your distant ancestors finishing a hunt. The liver gets eaten first, often raw, partly because it spoils fast, but also because it's dense with exactly the minerals a body running low on sodium is desperate for. That instinct wasn't culture. It was chemistry. The Australian physiologist Derek Denton spent decades studying this exact appetite, running experiments on animals to show that a craving for salt is not learned behavior. It is wired in, ancient and shared across nearly every land mammal that needs sodium to survive. He found that animals raised in complete isolation, animals that had never once tasted salt before, would still seek it out immediately the first time they were given the choice. Nobody taught them. The craving was already sitting there, waiting for the right trigger. Denton's work suggested this appetite likely predates humans entirely, shaped over millions of years by the same chemistry problem: not enough sodium and a body that fails slowly without it. But here is where it gets interesting. Groups that shifted toward plant-heavy diets, especially after the rise of farming roughly 10,000 years ago, were suddenly eating far less sodium than their hunting ancestors had. Grains carry only trace amounts of it. So agriculture didn't just change what people ate, it quietly created the very shortage that turned salt into something worth searching for, worth trading for, eventually worth fighting over. Which brings us to the actual archaeological record. Where do we find the first evidence that humans went looking for salt on purpose? The answer sits in modern-day Bulgaria, at a site called Provadia Sonisata. Archaeologists working there, led by researcher Vasil Nikolov, uncovered the remains of a salt production operation dating back roughly 7,000 years. Kilns, furnace pits, ceramic vessels built specifically to boil salty spring water down into solid blocks that could be carried, stored, and traded. This wasn't someone sprinkling a pinch onto a meal, this was industry. Some researchers even argue the walls and fortifications later found at the site suggest people were protecting their salt supply the way you might protect gold. Think about that. One of the earliest known fortified settlements in Europe may have existed to guard a mineral your body treats as a basic requirement, not a luxury. What does that tell you about how badly humans wanted it back once farming had quietly taken it away? Now here's the twist. If salt is genuinely essential, then people who eat almost none of it should be struggling. That's not what the evidence shows. Researchers studying the Yanomami people of the Amazon rainforest found a population living on some of the lowest sodium intakes ever measured anywhere on Earth. And they weren't falling apart. Their blood pressure stayed remarkably low throughout their lives, even into old age, at a time when blood pressure in industrialized nations climbed steadily with every passing decade. Those findings later fed into the large multinational Intersalt study, which compared sodium intake and blood pressure across dozens of populations across the globe. The pattern held everywhere. Communities eating diets closest to how early humans likely ate showed almost none of the age-related blood pressure rise so common in salt-heavy modern societies. So which is it? A life-saving necessity or a modern indulgence your body never needed in such quantity? The answer is both, depending on the dose. Your body requires some sodium to survive, but it evolved expecting scarcity, not abundance. It built a craving system tuned for a world where salt showed up in a few grams of meat juice, not in a bag of chips you can buy for less than $1. That mismatch is the real story here. Your ancestors' bodies were shaped by hundreds of thousands of years where the challenge was finding enough salt, never too much. Then, in an evolutionary blink, first through farming and later through industrial food processing, the problem flipped completely. Salt became everywhere, cheap, added to nearly everything, while your craving system never got the memo. That ancient alarm bell going off in your brain when you smell fries has no idea it's ringing inside a kitchen instead of a savanna. This is why the craving feels so involuntary. It's not weakness. It's a survival mechanism stretching back further than agriculture, still running its original programming in a world that quietly changed the rules underneath it. Your ancestors who craved salt the hardest were often the ones who survived the leanest seasons. That trait got passed forward, generation after generation, all the way down to you, sitting at a table with a shaker within arm's reach. And that is the part worth sitting with. The instinct that makes you reach for the salt without thinking isn't random. It's a signal from deep history, one that used to mean the difference between thriving and slowly wasting away. It just happens to be firing in a world where the thing it's begging for is no longer scarce, no longer earned through hunting or trade, no longer worth building a fortified settlement to protect. So the next time you salt your food before you've even tasted it, remember what that motion actually is. It's not a modern habit. It's an ancient one, dressed up in a kitchen you'd barely recognize, still trying to keep you alive the same way it kept your ancestors alive long before anyone thought to ask when humans started eating salt in the first place.